All right, well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for our presentation, NTSB Commercial Vehicle Crash Investigations, Findings and Recommendations. Today's presentation is brought to you by the Transportation Learning Network and the Commercial Vehicle Safety Center. TLN and the CVSC are programs of the Upper Great Plains Transportation Institute at North Dakota State University. TLN is a dynamic partnership with the 4 state DOTs of North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, and Wyoming, where we deliver technical transfer and best practices to the transportation industry. I will now hand off the mic to Brenda Lance, the Associate Director of Upper Great Plains Transportation Institute and the Director of the Commercial Vehicle Safety Center.
Great. Thanks a lot, Chris, and greetings to everyone. It's really great to see so many attendings on the meeting today, and just thank you for taking the time to join us. Thanks as well to our speaker today, Sean Curry, and to Chris and all the other staff at our Transportation Learning Network for their help in coordinating this meeting. And I'd also like to acknowledge and thank the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration for the grant funding that makes our work in these webinars possible. As Chris mentioned, for those who don't know me, my name is Brenda Lance. I'm the Associate Director of UGPTI, as well as the Program Director for our Commercial Vehicle Safety Center. And again, we're excited to have all of you with us today. So the webinar today is going to help us understand some of the key findings and investigations related to commercial vehicle crashes. And it's also going to provide some insights into common factors that contribute to those crashes and go on to describe some subsequent recommendations from the NTSB. And suggestions for future topics for webinars are always welcome. So if anything comes to mind, either during this webinar or at a later time, feel free to contact me. And so with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today. Sean Curry is a senior highway safety and accident investigator with the National Transportation Safety Board, specializing in motor carrier factors. He has worked with the NTSB for 7 years and has over 29 years of public safety, emergency management, and investigative experience, including over 21 years with the Maine State Police. Sean, welcome, and I'll turn it over to you to get us started.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. I'd say good afternoon, but you never know where you are, so I'll say good day. As Brenda said, my name is Sean Curry, and I'm an investigator with the Office of Highway Safety in the National Transportation Safety Board. So I can't see everybody like I could if we were sitting together, but I'd ask now, who has worked with the NTSB? And chances are there'd probably be maybe 2 or 3 people in the room, but for the most part, not a lot. So I have 3 parts of my presentation today. The first one's going to be on our investigative process, and then we're going to go into a case that we did to show you how that process works. And then what everybody probably wants, I saved till the end, is several slides about how we can prevent, or I guess I should say, the most common things that we find that contribute to a crash, so involving a commercial vehicle. So without further ado. And yep, there we go. So who we are, we're an independent federal agency charged by Congress with investigating every civil aviation accident. We're commonly known as, you'll see every plane crash, usually the NTSB is involved. But what you don't know is we have other modes: railroad, transit, highway where I work, marine, pipeline, and recently we added commercial space. What we do, we determine a probable cause of an accident or a crash, issue safety recommendations aimed at preventing future accidents, carry out special studies concerning transportation safety, and coordinate resources of the federal government and other organizations to provide assistance to victims and their families. So if we're involved in a multi-jurisdictional crash, I'm lucky or unlucky enough to be the lead investigator at the Philadelphia I-95 bridge collapse that happened just a few months ago with a truck fire that caused it. And there are a lot of different federal agencies there. We end up with primacy over that. So we have to coordinate with all our, I call them our cousins, our other federal cousins. So our job is to make transportation safer. Here's a quick slide that shows you how we came about. A lot of people think we work for DOT. We don't. We're an independent agency that we split off in 1974. The reason they split us off, to give you the 10,000-foot view, is we commonly make recommendations to DOT, and they didn't think it was right that the same agency was making recommendations to itself. So we are an independent board. It's typically composed of 5 members appointed by the president and with the advice and consent of Senate. As of now, we have 4 members. You can see them there: Chair Homendy, Vice Chair Landsberg, Member Graham, and Member Chapman. We have 2 other people that have been nominated that process takes a little bit. So some of the things we look at, the top left is the Miami bridge collapse. It was a pedestrian bridge at Miami that collapsed onto the highway. Then we've got rail. The one on the right is a pipeline explosion, natural gas entering a house. There's a whole, once it gets beyond the meter into the house, it's not an issue. That one in the top right is from Merrimack Valley, New Hampshire. Or excuse me, Merrimack Valley, Massachusetts, where they overpressurized the gas system. I went to that. That was quite a scene. The El Faro, I don't know if anybody's heard of that. It's the cargo ship that sank off the course on the way to Puerto Rico. Asiana Air, that's a big plane crash. And the last one was our first autonomous vehicle. It was a Tesla that was in an autonomous mode. So that was a few years back. The Office of Highway Safety, we have a total of 38 positions that are not all full, just like the rest of the world. We have a lot of vacancies. That includes managers, investigators, writers, support staff, and our administrative folks. We have our investigations division is split into two separate areas. We have multidisciplinary investigative branch where I work, and we have a special investigations branch. And we also have a report development portion. Totally, the NTSB has about 420 employees. Most of those are in aviation. I think we have like 120 aviation investigators. So with only 35, I think we have 35 people on deck right now in highway. It's hard to cover everything. So people ask, what kind of crashes do we investigate? Well, here's our authority. I won't read it to you because these slides are going to be provided, but it talks about how we do what we do. And there's where our authority is derived from. And here's some of the crashes we investigate. The answer to the question of what kind of crashes do we investigate, it really depends. Since we only send a team of 5 to 10 highway crashes in a given year, there's quite a bit into deciding which crashes to investigate. Some of the criteria might include crashes of high public interest. Is it something we've done before? If it is something we've done before, are there specific issues and similarities? Can we make a difference? And the one that everybody has to deal with is, do we have the appropriate resources to send? On the screen here, you'll see some of the examples of the major crashes we've gone to most recently. School bus crashes, bridge collapses onto traffic are something that we definitely will go to. We're also doing a lot of emerging technology issues like automated vehicle crashes or semi-autonomous vehicle crashes, electric battery fires, and other emerging alternative fuel technology crashes. I think we've done obviously lithium-ion battery incidents, and we did a hydrogen incident in California that I was involved in. So the crash happens and we get notification. We have a response operations center. That's a picture here. Looks really cool. Those two people that you see seated, there's two people there 24/7, 365. They monitor all those screens to see what's happening in the world, and sometimes they'll pick up the crash from a news alert, or they'll be notified by a law enforcement agency or other Office of Emergency Management's type offices will let us know. Once notified of a crash, the center begins a rapid dissemination of information to the NTSB investigators to decide if a team's going to be sent, who's going to be sent, and when the investigation is going to start. The center assists with coordinating logistical and operational support, so they usually set up our hotel arrangements, get us who to talk to from the local law enforcement agency. And we have a travel service that somebody always asks, well, how do you get there? We have a travel service we call, they book all our stuff for us. So Tier 1 urgent notifications, we have a duty officer within highway that will actually get called for some of these, and they're the first step. You can read those. Tier 2 is a watch list, things that we're always looking. Grade crossings with a bus, crash during automated vehicle testing. And then Tier 3, discretionary. Those happen almost daily. So the multidisciplinary team approach, we have group chairs. They used to be group chairmen, but we call them group chairs now. The investigator in charge, he or she basically is in charge of the investigation, and they make sure everything's coordinated on scene. They do a lot of the liaison type work, making sure that the investigators are getting their resources. They also report back up the chain to headquarters. You can see all the different disciplines, human performance. They look at sleep, medication, intoxication, distraction. Research and engineering, they're a reach back for us. They do recorders, fire science. We actually have, well, we only have one now, but we used to have 3 medical doctors, so we'll be hiring some of those. They look at hospital records to determine if someone had issues prior to the crash. Vehicle investigators, they do a forensic vehicle inspection. Motor carrier investigator, that's what I do. I look at companies and drivers to look at carriers to make sure they have management safety practices, that they have policies and procedures in place, and that they actually are following the policies and procedures, and also to make sure the driver and the carrier are following state and federal regulations. So survival factors, they look at safety equipment usage, airbags, seat belts. On motor coaches, they looked, and other crashes, they look to determine what the mechanism of injury was. Like if you think of a bus, like a tour bus, you have all the TVs and everything else. They look at those to see if those are secured or if they were involved. That's part of what they do. They also do emergency response to make sure that the police and fire response was timely and appropriate. And then highway factors, we actually have people who are highway engineers. They look at the surface of the road, signage, speed limits, all the engineering portion of it. And then we put that all together. We'll describe that in a little bit. So we run a parallel safety investigation. Law enforcement is usually running their own investigation, and we just parallel that. It becomes important to the police agencies that we work with, especially when there's potential criminal charges, because we're not a law enforcement agency. We're a non-regulatory agency. So a lot of things that we can obtain by policy and by CFR, the police have to get a warrant or a subpoena for. So that always helps when we're not working in the same, I guess on the same street as them. So our accident reports, or excuse me, our reports may not be used or admitted into evidence in any action for damages. So no civil stuff for us. There's no judicial review of our probable cause findings, and our investigation remains open indefinitely for new evidence. So we basically obtain the same information as law enforcement, we just get it differently. So, and here is our authority. The only way you can get in trouble and go to jail with us is if you purposely mislead us under 18 U.S.C. 1001. It has happened before in I believe it was a pipeline case in California where an entity basically falsified and concealed some records, and it didn't work out so well for them. We work under the party process, which sounds a lot more fun than it is. Basically, if you have a specialized knowledge that we don't have, because we are, you know, if you look, it says who they usually are. If you're a carrier, for instance, one of the case I'm going to talk to you about here shortly involved both UPS and FedEx Ground, two very, very big carriers in America. Actually, I think UPS is the largest carrier in America. They basically have their own languages, and they're not the same. So we included them as a party member to help move that investigation along. So some of the benefits are technical expertise and proposed investigative area, And I think the biggest one I'll summarize is that they have almost instant access to our investigative information. So if they can make a change quickly before our report comes out. So instead of waiting 1.5 to 2 years, which unfortunately is how long some of our reports to come out, if we find an issue with one of their safety practices and they are a party member, they can have access to that like right now, and they can start making changes. And I've seen it happen, and it's really rewarding when they do. Some of the responsibility of the party members is here. You don't have to be a party member. It helps. For instance, we're doing a case and one of the other federal agencies isn't going to be a party member. They decided not to, but they are providing us with all the information that we requested. So here are some of the investigator in charge duties. And if it seems like I'm scooting through my slides fairly quickly, I apologize, but I want to make sure there's plenty of time at the end for questions. So you'll be provided, like I said before, with copies, or they're going to be available for you to look through. Here's our process. It takes a while. So we do an on-scene investigation. That's usually a week or two that we're actually on scene, or before we head back home. And then from that, there's a preliminary report, which comes out about 10 to 14 days after we return home. There's a technical review, so the party members will have a chance to review our factual reports and our attachments, and that's about 8 months from the return date. And then we release the docket, the public docket, which is a copy of all our reports, all our factual reports, and all of our attachments that we've used or referenced in those factual reports. And then the final report comes out. It's up to 2 years. It's usually about 1.5 years. The company line is you only have one chance to get it right, so we have to do it. Our review process is long. So that is that. And we have a bunch of different product types. Preliminary report, that is basically what we know at about 10 to 14 days in. Sometimes it's very, very basic. We do investigative hearings. The latest one was the East Palestine, Ohio, for the train and hazmat release. That was just occurred in June. We do highway investigative reports. We do safety alerts, meetings, roundtables, and webinars. And if you don't agree with our findings, you can file a petition for reconsideration. Board meetings. Once our investigation is over, the board members vote on the investigative report. Sometimes we have meetings in Washington, but since COVID came and left, we don't do them in person anymore. We do them virtually. It's a public meeting in Washington, but now they're webcast. We're basically the same format that we're doing now. Staff does presentations, the board deliberates, and then they vote. And they may change what our recommendations in a report say, but because they can amend. So once they pass it, it's an official board product. So safety recommendations. It's probably our most important product based on the findings from the investigation. Gives a course of action to improve vehicle design, maintenance, operational procedures, policies, training, other safety issues identified. It's our official position on needed action. So there's 2 parts to a recommendation classification, either in progress or completed, open or closed. And then it gives you 4 different ways that you can either leave them open or close them out. So the NTSB estimates that over 50-year history, it's issued more than 14,500 safety recommendations to recipients, but the board's never measured its effectiveness in such terms. I think we're about 80% of our recommendations have been adopted or have been closed positively, which still leaves 20% out there that we're just recommendations. They're not demands. So we have a most wanted list. I think that's going to end this year, but As you can see, these are the ones that directly apply to highway, and it's kind of a roadmap, if you will, things we want to combat to try to reduce crashes, because we all know there's too many crashes. It was probably roughly 40,000 people a year that die in highway crashes, and it's kind of some strategies that we're trying to address to reduce that. And our job is to promote transportation safety. Investigators do presentations at conferences, symposiums, roundtables, training classes, and peer training. So we used to do a lot more conference outreach. We're starting to get back into it, and obviously webinars, right? Everybody loves a good webinar. So the job's not completed in the boardroom. We still have to go out and fly the flag, and we go and have these conferences and meetings, and we try to be very, I won't say picky, but we try to be very strategic. That way, if we go to a specific group, we usually have a recommendation for that group, and we try to, I guess, sell it, for lack of a better term. So that was the end of part one, and I apologize for the rapidity of it, but here's part two. I'm going to cover one of our crashes. It's a multi-vehicle crash that happened in Mount Pleasant Township in Pennsylvania, and I was involved in this crash. Like I said, we have parties. Usually if we involve something that involves, we're investigating something that involves a commercial motor vehicle, FMCSA is our partner. They're party to the investigation. In this case, we had some state partners, and then UPS, FedEx, like I alluded to before, and we included Daimler Trucks of North America because they're a technical expert, and you'll see why, because we had 3 truck tractors involved in this crash, and they were all Daimlers. So here's some crash information for you. It happened on Interstate 70 on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, 36 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. Here's an overview of the crash. As you can see, it's quite a furball, for lack of a better term. We have a FedEx tractor and FedEx trailer. We have a motor coach that was on its side. We have a UPS tractor and trailer ×2, and you can't really see it, but there is a car in there somewhere, and we'll get back to that. So motor coach, FedEx tractor trailer, UPS ×2, and a passenger car. Here's the injury. We had 5 total fatalities, 50 injured, 8 with no injuries, 6 with unknown injuries, for a total of 69 people involved in this crash. Some of the exclusions we had. Hold on. Here's a crash scene. As you can see from the signs here, it's quite a mountainous, curvy road. It had snowed, but you can see where everything collected down here at the bottom. So one of the things we look at is we try to, when we're on scene, we try to exclude things so we can figure out how it happened. In this case, we were able to exclude, for the motor coach, their use of alcohol. We excluded the driver qualifications. The driver had had a license for quite a while, had been operating the same bus. Through the subpoena of cell phone records, we were able to determine he wasn't on his phone at the time. And we really didn't have enough evidence of motor coach driver fatigue to prove it one way or the other. Unfortunately, the driver passed away in this, so we were unable to talk with him and get a better, we usually try to do like a 72-hour picture of the driver's sleep and activities and everything else. We found that the emergency response was timely and effective. The mechanical condition of the motor coach wasn't an issue. The pavement wasn't an issue, and neither was the treatment of the roadway. Some of the safety issues we came up with in this one was a commercial driver's speeds while driving in wet conditions, forward collision avoidance systems and connected vehicle technology, and we reviewed onboard video event recorder systems. So you've already seen this. So we'll go through that first circle you have there is the motor coach. Then you got FedEx, which was the second vehicle in the wreck. That was struck by the UPS tractor trailer. Then a car came along and got squished between the two UPS trucks. This is the bus when it was righted. It's a 2005 Van Hool. You can see damage. The picture on the left is the front, looking at where the door would be, and the second one is looking at the rear. So this bus, when it flipped over, was on its driver's side. So the side you see in the left portion was down on the roadway, and the bottom of it was facing traffic. The nose of it was up against the median. Here's a picture of it from the FedEx forward-facing video. We circled it, but the initial position was blocking both lanes in the shoulder. We determined that the bus entered the curve at 77 miles an hour, had some light braking, slowed down to 70, and then lost control and ended up impacting the embankment and coming over. The bus was at rest, and people were starting to get out of the bus when it was struck by the FedEx unit, but we'll get into that in a second. So here's the FedEx unit. As you can see, not a ton of damage to the front. It was a 2018 Freightliner hauling a 2019 trailer. The back of it was fairly substantially damaged from the impact with the next UPS truck that we'll talk about. So through the camera and other telematics data, we were able to determine that the truck was only going 53 in the right lane. We were able to see where the motor coach had passed the FedEx truck about 79 seconds before they collided. So it had passed the truck and gone out of sight. And the driver, as he was driving along, was very attentive, noticed what he described as a wall across the road and began reacting. And he was able to steer left towards the median and brake, and he dropped his speed down to about 21 miles an hour, which was a huge drop for the people who were still on the bus when it was struck. Unfortunately, he was then struck by this UPS tractor trailer. It was a glancing blow to the trailer. But you can see the catastrophic damage to the truck tractor on the left. Not a lot of damage to the trailer, but it basically sheared off the driver's side of the truck tractor, killing both the driver who was driving, obviously, and the co-driver who was in the sleeper berth. That one is also a 2018 Freightliner. He entered the curve at about 71 miles an hour. He braked and tried to swerve to the right, but ended up colliding with the right rear. His speed was about 67 during the previous 2 hours of travel on the turnpike. Here's a vehicle that belongs to the two luckiest people in the world. It's a 2007 Mercedes. We don't really talk about them much because they were just kind of collected up in this mess. They were able to exit the vehicle through the sunroof, and they disappeared. They caught a ride and left the scene. No injuries. So they're very, very lucky. And UPS combination unit number 2 was another Freightliner Cascadia, and is very little damage to that. He was able to avoid the major portions of the impact. He was going slower, had a lot more visual clues from the impact of his other UPS truck. So one of the things we really liked about this crash, if there's anything to like about a crash, is the fact that the onboard video from the FedEx truck gave us a lot of the pieces of the puzzle that we normally wouldn't have. It gave us a motor coach speed and lane position when he was passing. As you can see, this is 2 stills. This is the bus passed, and you can see he gets on his brakes a little bit in the bottom picture, but you can see how the operation was, and as he disappeared out of sight. You can see that the bus was in fairly good condition, and it also showed us the driver's reaction. There was a lack of data on the motor coach. We don't know why it initially lost control. We knew that the driver was awake because there was some steering inputs, but we don't know to what extent. And we had some issues with the engagement of the engine brake. We didn't know if it was on or off just due to the fact that the switches and everything were destroyed. What we found from the onboard video event recorders, we find this a lot. The forward and inward facing video event systems provided valuable information. The old adage of pictures worth 1,000 words. I like to add to that and say video is priceless. They can provide key information about circumstances, and they can proactively be used through positive coaching to improve driver performance. And we made some recommendations to NHTSA, FMCSA, ABA, and the United Motor Coach Association. And so about this crash, the motor coach trip started in New York City at about 10 p.m. It was a line run, and the driver was due to switch to another, basically a relief driver in about 10 miles before or after he crashed. So he was scheduled to arrive about 4:15 p.m. He was right on schedule. Everything was good. He'd only been driving for about 7 hours. The bus was going to continue on to Ohio. The environmental conditions, it was snowing, but as you can see, the road's treated to the left. It's just wet. We always do some research about similar crashes or similar circumstances to see, give a better picture. The motor coach driver's background, he was experienced and properly licensed. Like I said, he had quite a bit of driving experience, 11 years. He was properly licensed, had a 2-year medical certificate. He did have a previous speed citation, and he had 2 previous minor crashes. And the speed citations and minor crashes are things that the human performance person looks into, and they look to see if, are you a risky driver, or do you have a significant history. Here's a graphic using some telematics data from the bus. You can see he came in at 77, and just prior to crashing, he was going 60. So he was traveling at excessive speeds, which is fairly common if you look. Probably one of the biggest contributors between that and distraction that causes crashes. Who's that? FedEx driver. He reacted within 0.3 seconds, which I think it's been a while since I've done accident reconstruction, but I think that's well below the average perception reaction time. And he was able to drop it, I think, 32 miles an hour in the space that he had available. If you look at the inward-looking video, his hands were at 10 and 2, and he was leaning forward, and he said the reason he was so attentive is because it's Pennsylvania and there's a lot of deer strikes, and he didn't want to hit a deer. So I think his attentiveness probably saved some lives in this. Driver's response for UPS 1, we obviously quite creative in our labeling, is 1 and 2. He was coming in this curve also a little over the speed limit. It was going 71. He saw that the FedEx truck had been slowing. He applied the brakes and steered to the right, but he still hit it about 56 miles an hour. Driver 2. Here's what we found, some of our findings. So highway characteristics for this crash. This is the things that, as I said before, the highway group chair does. Pennsylvania Turnpike was built in 40. Numerous horizontal curves, downgrade. They do all that kind of stuff. Then they look at the signage. to see if it was appropriate. They look at the speed limits, how they established. Then they look how they obtained the speed limit, which is the 85th percentile. Some of our people are not a huge fan of the 85th percentile, but then once again, we look at our previous investigations to see if there's anything related. You know, speed's been on our most wanted list since 2019, just due to the fact that it's a risky behavior that seems to cause more crashes. Here's some of the findings from it. We want to de-emphasize the 85th percentile and set appropriate limits. Here's the most exciting stuff, the motor carrier stuff. The bus companies from Rockaway, New Jersey, they owned 8 motor coaches. So they were not a small, well, they were a small company, but not a tiny one. They had no alerts in FMCSA's basics. FedEx Ground, they're out of Moon Township, Pennsylvania. You can see they lease a lot of vehicles and they're responsible for about 92,000 drivers. They leased this particular truck from Sioux Trucking. They do have they did at the time have alerts and hours of service and driver's fitness. And then UPS, which is, like I said, I believe they are the biggest carrier. 126,000 trucks and 118,000 drivers they're responsible for the safety of. They are all UPS employees, and they had 2 seasoned drivers that were involved in this crash. One of the things we found was maintenance issues. UPS truck number 1 had a misaligned radar sensor in their collision avoidance system, the Ford collision avoidance system. The error code and warning had been in place since June of 2019. And if I remember correctly, this crash was like December of 19 or January of 20. I think it was January 20, actually. Penske, they leased their truck from Penske, and they had detected it in their routine maintenance since July of 2019. So, you know, it had been a good 4 or 5 months that this warning lamp, which is indicated by the big yellow arrow, had been on. It had been noted several times on the maintenance records, but the driver of the vehicle had never written it up on a driver vehicle inspection form or report. And here are 2 different ones for the same truck. Really hard to read them because they're the carbon copy, if you will. The one on the left was from 11/18, and the one on the right is from 12/29. So I think it was like a week prior to, and there's no safety related checks on either. Everybody says everything's great. So some of the post-crash actions, Penske had placed vehicles with Ford collision avoidance system defects out of service in-house. That process, before they didn't have a outward-looking system, you had to log on to check your vehicles. Obviously, when you're leasing 100,000 vehicles, that becomes an issue. So they were pretty proactive. They started putting them out of service. When they placed the vehicle out of service, the lessor would receive a notification email. They could override it if they wanted to, but they didn't. Between May of 2020, when they first implemented it, and December 2021, when we talked to them about it, they put over 6,300 vehicles out of service, which is quite a few. UPS had changed their driver training and their check ride form to account for the advanced safety systems. If you look at where the arrow is pointing, I had asked the driver trainer if he knew what it was, and he didn't, because they had never covered it before. So it's now been addressed. So they were able to do some, instead of waiting for our recommendations, they made some safety accomplishments. So we found that maintaining the full functionality of installed collision avoidance system is critical to vehicle safety. And that DVIR, driver vehicle inspection report, is really like the first step in getting things fixed on a truck. So if a driver puts it down, it's fixed. If they don't, then it's consequently not. It's not a required system yet, so it wasn't required to be on the DVIR by federal regulation. What's been required to be on the DVIR hasn't changed since 1979. So we can all agree there's been some significant changes since 1979 in vehicle technology. So hopefully, if they do include collision avoidance systems and automatic emergency braking as a required item, then it will obviously end up on there. One of the things we talked about are heavy vehicle speed limiters. The motor coach didn't have one in this. The passive ones, I think everybody's vehicle in this did have a passive one. And then they have advanced or intelligent, relies on cameras and GPS to read and verify roadway speeds and adjust. Those are not in place right now. So, we had the speed findings that we talked about earlier. So Ford collision. So there's no federal performance standards for CAS and heavy vehicles. NHTSA proposed a criteria in 2019, but unfortunately the parameters of this would have been beyond NHTSA's proposed testing protocols just due to the speed, the fact that it wasn't straight or clear, and they only target the rear of a passenger vehicle, and this was an upside down bus that was not reflective at all. So there's that. A little more on CAS. So what we found is, unfortunately the crash was beyond the proposed system, so we didn't make any recommendations there. This has been a thing we've been dealing with for years, is collected vehicle technology. V2X, basically vehicle to everything, other vehicles, roadways, infrastructure. It's coming in the future, they tell us, so we'll have to wait and see. And here's what we determined the probable cause to be. And now the part you've all been waiting for, lessons learned. How can we prevent heavy vehicle crashes from occurring? So I've been involved in crash investigations since 1994 when I got hired by the state police in Maine. Actually, probably before that when I was in the Air Force, but we didn't really do a lot of big crashes, fortunately, because there's such low speeds on the bases. And I started doing accident reconstruction in 1999. So I don't even want to do the math on that. It makes me feel older as the days go on. So here are some of the lessons I've learned since working at the board since 2015. So as a company, you want to have a quality hiring process. You want to do some really good background checks and a long license look back. I think historically, DMVs will give you 3 years. I would try to get them to give you 5 years if you could. A lot of companies that I unfortunately look at, some of them do have policies and some of them don't have policies. And by policies, I'm talking policies on speeding, on unsafe driving, on cellular phone use. I mean, pretty much everybody has a drug and alcohol or controlled substance and alcohol policy because you're regulatorily mandated to have that if you have a commercial driver. But if you have a policy, follow them. I remember in 2017, I investigated a school bus crash just down the road here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. First time I've ever been to Tennessee. And a company had great policies and procedures. But if they had followed their policies and procedures, the driver would not have been employed at the time of the wreck. He was a risky driver. He was a high-risk driver, just from some of the complaints that have been made against him. But they wanted to give the kid a chance. They didn't really hold him accountable. He was on like doubles. They had certain behaviors in their policy manual that if you, basically it was a one strike and you're out. Well, he had 3 of those one strike and you're out violations, but was still there because the manager was trying to give him a break. Make sure you hold your people accountable, because when it comes right down to it, it's just how much are you willing as a company to risk. So talk about issues. If you have videos, review them. Use them, you can coach them, you can reward or punish, but make sure you're using them. More and more, we see a lot of companies that are putting videos in and they leave, they're a 100, 200 truck company and they have one person that's supposed to review all the events. It's almost too much for that person. And so they start dialing back what alerts they get, or they, will have things that, that one person was supposed to review the video, but he was out sick. And 3 days later, it's involved in a crash. And they go back and look at the video and they're like, oh, well, it's the exact same thing that happened in the crash. It's hard. It's sad, actually. Fatigue. We see a ton of fatigue related crashes. Talk about fatigue in your policies. Talk about fatigue in your training. There's the fatigue management program that kind of laid dormant for a while, but the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance has picked it back up. It's free training. If you haven't looked at it, you should. There's all kinds of different modules for management, for drivers, for everything else. Speed kills. That goes without saying. If you have a policy on speed and you have drivers that are continuously violating it, maybe it's time for some retraining. Maybe it's time for, I've seen companies that have a reward system, but they also have a punishment system. So if you're a safe driver, you get cash bonuses. If you're a non-safe driver, you actually get penalized monetarily. That usually gets people's attention. If there is unsafe driving that's observed or reported, follow up on it, investigate it, at least talk to the driver about it. Let them know that it's not acceptable behavior. And video. At first, when I was a state trooper, in-car video came out and everybody was against it because nobody likes to be watched. It's probably the same people on Zoom. But after about 3 weeks, I loved it. A lot of drivers at first don't like the video, especially the inward facing, until it saves them. On this particular crash I just showed you, without that video from the FedEx truck, there would have been so many questions that we couldn't answer, or that, we relied upon testimony as opposed to actual video evidence to do. So if you have a video, use it. But in the end, it's about the quality of people that you employ. It's about the quality of your policies and procedures and management safety practices. Because at the end of the day, you can have all the policies and procedures in the world, but it comes down to your driver when they're all alone out there on the road. Are they making the right decision? Are they being pressured to deliver quickly, no matter what the weather is or no matter what the traffic is? It's one of those things. So that was a very speedy presentation, but I made it and gave you guys 10 minutes for questions. If you have any, here's my contact information. That's my cell phone and my email. So I will open it up for questions.
I'll get started. I don't know, Brenda, if you've been taking note on some, but the very first one that's in the chat is, can you explain the 85th percentile speed in a little more detail? And why do you want to de-emphasize the use of that 85th percentile?
So I by no means am I the highway factors person. I would defer that to one of them. I can get whoever gave me that answer and get back to them. The issue is, it's based on, if I get this correctly, it's the 85th percentile speed is you base the speed limit on what 85% of the vehicles are going. So if they're going over the posted speed limit, or what is determined safe, and you base it solely on the 85th percentile, then it's kind of, is there anybody here that's an expert on the 85th percentile? because I am definitely not by my answer. So I can get that back to you, Don Moen. I promise you.
Okay, and then there's another one, a lot of negativity about speed limiters in the CMV industry to the point where Congress is involved. Isn't this a bit counterintuitive? And there's a response from Dan Murray on that as well. So I don't know if it looks like you have it in front of you there. So if you want to take a peek at that and maybe address that.
So speed limiters, we don't have an official NTSB stance on that. Obviously, the Sean Curry non-official NTSB disclaimer is that sometimes if you limit a vehicle to 55 miles an hour, that's great. But if everybody else is going 85 miles an hour because that's the speed limit, then you could cause a problem. Or sometimes 55 is too fast. So I think that's why they're pushing for the, wow, there's a lot of questions popping in. I can't look at that. I think that's why they're pushing more for the intelligent speed limiters.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on the chat for you.
Thanks. Yeah. What else do we have here?
So do compensation and incentives factor into both speed and fatigue? Are companies pressing drivers to keep to schedules even if they are tired and haven't timed out?
I would say some companies and some brokers, the answer to that question is yes. Obviously, if you get paid by the mile, the more you drive, the more you get paid. Very rarely do drivers get paid by the hour. So if they can quickly turn that load around and get another load, then they'll make, they're being incentivized to do that. It's unfortunate that it happens because, if I was having my cargo transported, I would definitely want it to get there, not be sidetracked either by the driver being placed out of service for an hours of service violation or being destroyed and, being in a wreck.
What from the DOT side could have prevented this other than perhaps an en-route inspection that identified the speeding issue? Same thing with the MIHU characters maybe. Excuse me if I said that incorrectly. The FAST Act bans en-route inspections and national shortages of law enforcement reduces the chance of a stop/inspection based on driver behavior.
Oh, absolutely. Back to my last slide. It's this bus company. It's very rarely do you get a compliance review that doesn't have any issues. The prior compliance review for this company was clean. They had a very clean post-crash review. So they had all of the parts, the safety parts there. It comes down to the driver. The FAST Act does ban en route inspections. It was the bane of my existence when I ran the commercial vehicle unit in the state of Maine that I couldn't stop buses en route to make sure that they're being safe. And there is a shortage. I know my old unit is probably a third of the size it used to be. So to rely on roadside inspections, this bus would have passed a roadside inspection. There was no regulatory issues, no state violation issues. Just the driver was going too fast in the corner and lost control. So unfortunately, I don't think anything could have roadside taken care of that. Oh, somebody actually had an 85% answer. Thank you very much.
Next question then is, how do you go about getting a driver's 72-hour pre-life workup? Is it just interview based on, or is there more avenues for this coming from an LE perspective here?
So it's a combo. So we obviously subpoena phone records. That gives you opportunities for rest because if you're a truck driver who has a 12-hour sleeper berth block, but you're on your phone every 45 minutes, you're not getting rest there. So we do phone subpoenas. We do interviews. If the driver's alive, we obviously, have him tell us a story. If not, we go back, we look at, I'm just thinking things that I've done recently. We look at, have they fueled up? If so, where did they fuel up? Do they have a video? We see how they, are they acting normally? Did they interact with people? We talk to the people they interact with. We talk to their family. How do they sleep? What's their normal sleep pattern? Have they been sick? If they were at home prior to leaving on that trip, we try to get a snapshot of what their family members or friends or significant others or whoever, did he seem okay? Did he have any, work-life stressors other than what we all have, right? You got to make money to pay the bills. So, that we kind of look at it holistically like that. It's a little different from when I was in law enforcement, because when I did recs for the state police, it was, you really didn't have the extensive amount of time to do this deep dive, because there was always another crash that was coming. This one, by so few crashes that we investigate, doesn't sound like we do a lot, but we do. It's a very in-depth, I went to Philly in June, and I'm still reviewing surveillance videos from loading racks and everything else. It takes a while to get all that stuff in. So hopefully that answered that question.
Okay, next one. If everyone is speeding, you might raise this value too high. Other factors should be used to lower that 85th percentile to combat if everyone is just floors it through there. So I hope that helps. So I guess that was kind of a comment maybe to that 85th percentile.
That's okay. That's why there's a couple different ways that they want to get away from, meaning our highway folks are leaning away from the 85th. They like the newer versions.
Okay. And then generally, is distracted driving by commercial drivers a large problem? Texting, other distractions, that type of thing?
Distracted driving isn't just a commercial vehicle problem, but yes, commercial vehicle drive. Did you like that one?
Yeah.
So commercial vehicle drivers are, for the most part, they're very professional. It's like, 5% rule, but they fall prey to the same evils that we all do. It's bad. It's distracting. Some people can put it away and some people can't. It's unfortunate. I think if we really had a true picture of how many people were killed by distracted driving because of phones, I think we'd be appalled, in my opinion, not the board's, mine. So.
Thoughts on safety of commercial AV usage in the accident situation that you discussed?
So, yeah, I in a way, I like the concept of commercial, automated commercial vehicles. I think next month we're going out to actually do some demos with Aurora and some of the others. I went to the automated commercial vehicle inspection class that CVSA is starting to offer. And I think in some situations, it probably will make things safer. I'm still, this is not the board. I think anybody is, have seen the Terminator. I'm a little scared if they get self-aware, but I think it'll help. We'll see. It's the automated taxis and stuff. There's still some problems. I think that the technology is getting there, but I still think there's some work that needs to be done. Just from some of the automated vehicle passenger car ones that we've investigated, they're still quirky, for lack of a better term.
Okay, just a couple of comments out there that I will address in just a second here. But the next question, there was a question that was up there, and I wanted to kind of save it towards the end here as a few thank yous and other notes of gratitude there. But what role could academia play with the NTSB, such as programs like the Upper Great Plains Transportation Institute and those similar around the nation?
Good question. I think, providing opportunities like this to talk, and if we have something that's geographically specific, obviously it would be good to reach out to folks like you that kind of know the players in a geographic area. The hardest part that we have right now, a a lot of stuff we do is kind of almost industry specific, is finding the right audience to talk to. Because usually if you talk to, like, if you have a tank truck issue, you can talk to the National Tank Truck Carriers Association. But if you have, like a milk truck issue, you can Google milk truck associations, but I'm sure there's a lot of them to find just the right venue to do that. But, we're always looking for partners in safety. We like doing stuff like this where we can get the message out and kind of give you a glimpse behind the curtain at the great and powerful Oz and find out it's just me pulling levers. But, we have a whole safety advocacy department that it's their job to push our recommendations. So hopefully that answered that.
Okay, and then I'll just say the last question that just popped up is the automated driving vehicles when they're driving on snow-covered roads and they're not able to see the lines. I will say I've asked that question multiple times in other presentations when it comes to just autonomous vehicles and the smart, innovative technologies. The answer that I've always been told, and again, Sean, you can clarify if there's some additional resources, but to put it plain and simple, if you cannot see it with your eyes, your car cannot see it. So that's what I've been told. So those that are not fully autonomous, because I don't believe we have any that are currently available that are fully 100% autonomous. There's the different classes or the levels. And again, if you're not able to see it with your eyes, your vehicle won't. So that's something to consider as well.
Right. And I think you'll see that that's why a lot of the automated or autonomous or semi-autonomous vehicles are primarily in the southern tier from, say, Dallas, that Texas, flat Texas to Atlanta is where they're kind of running that corridor. I, having run radar for a lot of years in the snow in Maine, I get what happens to radar when it goes out. It's either reflected, refracted, or absorbed. Don't know why that stuck in my head. But in talking with vendors, I'm like, how's this going to work in the snow? Oh, it'll work. I'm like, yeah, but how? I mean, I don't understand. And, I think as technologies get better, it'll kind of be like the electric vehicle thing. I think it'll work in certain places, and other places it probably won't be feasible. I think a blend is probably what we'll end up with. And, as long as that blend reduces the amount of traffic crashes, it's good. If, with the things that I've seen or we've seen, I guess I can say collectively, sometimes that automation doesn't recognize things that it should. Like, there's been an awful lot of emergency vehicle strikes from vehicles in self-driving mode. And, big fire trucks are usually pretty easy to see. Why are you not recognizing a stopped big piece of metal as a threat and hitting it? So I still think there's some work to be done. I mean, there's a lot of really smart people, go to conferences and you talk to these people, and it's awe-inspiring what they have planned. It's just the whole getting to that point. I think, acceptance-wise, for me, I like to touch things. So when they're like, oh, it'll do this, I'm like, show me. And they're like, well, it's not ready to do that yet. And I'm like, then don't show me. Don't tell me about it until you're able to, because, but that's just me.
Okay. Brenda, thank you for putting that out there. The recording will be available on that website. And if you guys want to just bookmark that website, that's where the presentation materials are, and that's where the recording will be posted once it is available. So thank you for that. Brenda, do you have any closing comments before I wrap it up?
Sure, that'd be great. Thanks so much, Sean, for that presentation and the great discussion. Lots of good questions, great discussion at the end there, and obviously great insights as well as recommendations to take to heart for sure. As I mentioned at the beginning, this webinar is part of our Commercial Vehicle Safety Center, and as Chris mentioned, the slides, from this slides and recording from this webinar, as well as we also have the slides and recordings from past webinars available on there as well. And after this webinar, as Chris mentioned as well, you have be able to complete a short evaluation survey. Definitely appreciate you taking the time to do that, to provide your feedback and suggestions for any possible future topics. I'll just say thanks again to everyone, and we went a little long. Thanks for hanging in with us. Thanks for your attendance, and I'll turn it over to you, Chris, for closing.
Same thing. I'll just echo that gratitude and thank you for participating in today's event. We hope you enjoyed and gained some new knowledge from today's session. Have a fantastic rest of your week, and don't forget to be awesome. Take care, everyone.